Hey guys, it's Miss Vinian. I'm going to do a short tutorial video today for you for Reconstruction. So you should have some C notes and just have the heading filled out and we'll get started. So the central questions are: what impact did the Civil War leave on America? We're going to discuss that question for a while. It's a very important question. And how did the end of Reconstruction change the laws and daily practices of the nation, particularly those in Tennessee? So that's one of your standards that we're going to be looking at is how did it affect not just the nation but Tennessee. Two of our learning targets we're going to be covering are the Hayes-Tilden presidential election and how does that end Reconstruction, and explaining the changing status of African Americans in America from 1876 to the early 1900s. Okay. Also, you have my face here just so that you feel comfortable and you're not missing out. I am here. I'm not reading off a document. I'm here for you. So let's go ahead and move on. Okay, so Reconstruction, what was it? It's the period during which the U.S. began to rebuild after the Civil War. So we know that you have the North and the South and that things have fallen to crap, pretty much. The Union has won, and now the South, we know most of the battles were in the South, so they're going to have to rebuild. This also refers to the process the federal government used to readmit states into the Union. And we will kind of discuss that a little bit more in class, how the states were put back into the Union. But here's an example. A lot of these states did not come back into the Union until much later. So you can see the very last state that joined the Union again was in, let's see, 1868. So we have Military District 5. So you have these different military districts. So what would happen was once the Union took back over, these states were not willing to really rejoin the Union, but the Union took them over. So what we have is military districts. And so for each military district, the Union set down someone to be in charge of these military districts. Tennessee was not part of the military district because, like we previously mentioned, Tennessee was the first one to join the Union again. So you could see over here that these are the people. They're set up by commanding generals. So each district was covered by the Union. Once they rejoined the Union, then they could be a state again. Also during this time, after the end of the Civil War, you have the 13th Amendment, where basically abolished slavery. And so we want to thank Abraham Lincoln for that because he led the way to this through the Emancipation Proclamation. And even though we've talked about how the Emancipation Proclamation didn't exactly free the slaves, it was a good starting point for the 13th Amendment. However, with the freeing of slaves comes all sorts of problems. Freedmen had many problems. Where do they go? Where are their families? How are they going to live? All of these are very important questions. How are they going to make money? Now they're competing with white people for jobs. So basically, it's great that they've been freed, but there's really no organization. So one thing that the white people do during this time is they come up with black codes, and these are laws that are passed in southern states, and they limit African American freedoms. These black codes are going to last for a really long time, and they go hand in hand with Jim Crow laws. Some black code laws help start Jim Crow laws or influence Jim Crow laws, but the black codes come before them. And basically it's like forcing African Americans to work on farms, preventing them from holding guns, preventing them from doing things that real citizens of the country should be able to do. Here's an example. You can read this. This is a primary source from Alabama, and it's basically saying that if you are black or if you are interracial, you may not sleep or live or marry a freed a white person. Okay, so you can't do that. And you can see here that this is just one of the laws and how much money you would get. Okay, so voting rights. So other laws were passed to keep blacks from voting. So the 13th Amendment makes it so that slavery is abolished, but what would happen is that they would not let African Americans vote. So this is saying one law said former slaves had to pay a tax to vote. It's called a poll tax. They would not make white people pay the poll tax. They would only make former slaves. And what's the problem with that is that the former slaves don't have the money to pay the poll tax. So, of course, they're not going to vote. And if they don't vote, and you better write this down, if they're not voting, then African Americans are not helping make political decisions, and they're not getting legislation passed for them. another law was passed that said if your grandfather had voted, then you could vote. However, of course, none of the African Americans' grandfathers had voted because they were all slaves beforehand, or they were freedmen who, you know, couldn't vote. So they called this law the grandfather clause. So you need to make sure that you get that in there. And this is two ways out of several that they made it so that African Americans could not vote. Okay, one of the other ones would be the literacy test, and then you'd have to pass a reading test. Okay. So what we see here in this picture is showing that African Americans are trying to walk from this limited type of citizenship to full citizenship, but it's going to take a while. Okay, it's not going to just happen. Okay, so in Congress you have Republicans, and Republicans were very angry about the black codes. They felt the South was returning to its old ways, and they wanted to punish the South. So they wanted to make sure that the South changed all these before they were readmitted to the Union. The Congress felt this way, but the President Johnson, did not feel this way. He didn't mind as much. So the president will actually end up getting impeached. So the radical Republicans, we know, were on the side of Lincoln before Lincoln got shot. When Lincoln got shot, the Vice President Johnson took over, and he did not agree with the Congress. He was from the South, so he was more sympathetic to the South. Therefore, you have this battle between the executive office and the legislative office happening in Washington. Okay, and this is just like a picture that shows that radical Republicans are on the side of African Americans, that they want African Americans to have the right to vote, because if they don't, then we're going backwards in time. Which leads us to the 14th Amendment, and this is one thing, it basically said if you're a citizen you can vote, and so the 14th Amendment guaranteed citizenship to all people born in the U.S., because many people were saying that slaves weren't citizens, but if they were born in the U.S., that they could vote. You need to look here where it says except for Indians, because they did not allow Indians citizenship, even though Indians we know had been here long before European explorers. So it also said that the state government could not deprive any person of life, liberty, or property if you were a citizen. Okay, so we're going to skip through some of this. So Congress is angry at the president for not going along with their really strict Reconstruction policies. They want the South to change, to get rid of these black codes, and to rejoin the Union. As a result, Andrew Johnson will be one of the first presidents that was impeached. However, he will not be impeached because one vote will make it so that he gets to stay in office. He will not be voted for again. Okay? Impeachment, we know, is the process of charging a public official with a crime, and basically they failed to impeach him. If they had impeached him, he would have most likely left office. The only other time a president has been impeached was Bill Clinton, and if you don't know why, you can Google that, and we'll talk about it later. But then also, Nixon was going to be impeached, but he resigned. And we'll get to that as well later on. So things that are happening in the South, not good things. Yellow fever in Memphis spread from the slave ships, and almost 20,000 people died. This is an epidemic that occurs in Tennessee. And this is your Tennessee history, so you need to know it. This is the yellow fever house. This is where they would send people who are sick. And it makes me sick to my stomach thinking about that. But basically, yellow fever, you just get really sick. These are people this is like the example of the yellow fever house. Other things happening in the South at this time is the creation of the KKK. Now, the creation of the KKK in the New South is what they call it, is a little bit different than how we knew it in the 1920s. So the KKK is a secret society opposed to African Americans obtaining the civil rights, particularly to vote. And they use violence and intimidation. For example, they would wear their sheets, and they would come up to African Americans' house, knock on the door in the middle of the night, and pretend they were ghosts, trying to scare them away, trying to threaten them. They wore robes and hoods just to hide their identities. Later on in the 1920s, you're going to see that they no longer hide their identity. They are out and proud racist. So they were also known to have murdered a lot of people, a lot of unsolved murders because of the KKK. Okay, make sure if you're looking at those questions, that's good for you, because they will be on the formative assessment. Okay, and they're also known for standing near burning crosses and they're known for burning crosses near people's houses that they wanted to intimidate. Okay. This brings us to the 15th Amendment, which is one of the most important. In 1870, the 15th Amendment became law, and this is going to give African Americans, men, the right to vote. Now, women, it will be a lot more years. So this is 1870. We're going to get the right to vote in 1920. So it's going to be another 50 years, okay? And this is going to make women angry, and this is going to propel the women's rights movement, which we're going to cover, and it's my favorite. I love women's rights, obviously, because I'm a woman. Okay, so some important African-American legislators. You need to know this for Tennessee. There's 14 African-Americans that were voted into the General Assembly. They were all former slaves. This is amazing, guys, because when you have African-Americans that are in the government, they can start making decisions, and that is going to be great. But the problem is by 1887, once Reconstruction kind of fizzles out, no African Americans are elected to the 1950s, and that's from like intimidation and the poll taxes and all those because African Americans aren't able to vote. White people aren't going to vote African Americans in, and so that's why there was poll taxes and literacy tests to keep African Americans away from the polls so that white people could still make the decisions. Okay, so even though slavery is ended, we see that there's these still terrible racist things going on. Okay, and these are the first colored senators and representatives in the 41st and 42nd Congress of the United States. That's the name of the picture. Alright, so that brings us to Jim Crow laws. So starting in 1881, blacks had to stay in separate hotels, sit in separate parts of theaters, ride in separate rail cars, and have separate schools, libraries, and parks. This is also known as segregation. So when you talk about Rosa Parks and how she had to sit at the back of the bus, that is a segregation in Jim Crow law. Okay, so Jim Crow laws were made to segregate whites and blacks. Okay, and segregation is the legal separation of blacks and whites in public places. And Jim Crow laws are laws that force segregation. And Jim Crow laws are going to start during Reconstruction, and they're going to last all the way up till the 1960s. So you're going to hear about them a whole lot. Okay. And one of the biggest court cases at this time was the Supreme Court ruled segregation was legal in this court case called Plessy v. Ferguson. You better write that sucker down, Plessy v. Ferguson. They said that segregation was fair as long as separate but equal facilities were provided for African Americans. We all know by 100%, like, this is not true, okay? And there's pictures of, you have whites sitting in a classroom with books and tables and chairs, and then you have African Americans, and they're like outside sitting on the ground, and they don't have books or even paper. They're just listening to the teacher. These were not equal facilities. So what the Supreme Court thought was, well, if we do separate but equal, then they'll be able to get along. They won't be next to each other. But we all know that if you don't get along with someone, staying separate is not going to solve the problem. You need to be together and force that togetherness so that they can learn to be together. This separate but equal it's separate and unequal. However, the Supreme Court said it would be equal. It would take until 1965, 100 years after the Civil War ends, for Jim Crow laws to be outlawed. Okay, and we will talk about that. But this is something like that you could answer an essential question that will, how did the Civil War impact America? The Civil War impacted America because 100 years later we were still struggling for the same fight. And then lastly, this brings us to sharecropping. So the percentage of sharecrop farms, what is sharecropping? Let's go to what it is real quick, and we'll go back to that. So basically, after slavery, African Americans are free, except that farmers still need people to work on their farms. So what they do, because they can't go out and get a job and they can't travel, is this little chart right here. So you let somebody take a little part of your land. You loan them tools, you give them food and clothing, and basically you have them run that part of your crop. So then you can get part of that crop. Okay, so plants crop, harvest in autumn, turns up to half of the crop to landowner as payment of rent. Okay, so you would have to give over half of your crop to the owner of the land as payment. Okay, tenant gives the remainder of crop to someone that they're in debt to. So basically, the tenant farmer gets no money, the landowner gets money, and the people that you borrowed stuff from gets money, but you are technically still in the same way you were in its basic slavery. Okay, so these are this actually only covers learning target over African Americans, and we'll cover in class or on the next video about the Hayes-Tilden election. Okay, so you can take that off there. Make sure you do your questions on the left and fill out your summary before class, and I'll see you in class. Bye.